3 British men have been freed from jail in Egypt. They've spent the past 4 years behind bars for being members of a banned political party. Now they're threatening to sue the Egyptian government through the British courts for the torture and physical abuse they say they suffered. My guest today is one of those men. Maajid Nawaz, welcome to Hardtalk.
Thank you.
Why were you arrested in Egypt?
On the 1st of April in 2002, the State Security Police came to our house at about 3:30 a.m. With machine guns and hand grenades and literally a whole platoon of army officers with them. They invaded and ransacked my house. I had my wife and son with me and proceeded to take me in front of my wife and son, take me away without showing any ID, without showing any warrants. And I actually didn't know why I was arrested until much, much later on when I was finally charged. I didn't actually know.
You'd been in Egypt, you'd arrived in Egypt the September before, the day before September the 11th
That's
attacks.
right, yeah.
And you were there as a student to study, help with your studies in Arabic.
I was there on a compulsory year abroad. I'm with SOAS in the University of London. I study BA Arabic and Law. Everybody who studies this course has to go for his 3rd year to Egypt. And if he doesn't go, he doesn't get his degree. So I was there with my class.
Does it have to be Egypt, or does it not just have to be an Arabic country?
Well, it has to be either Egypt or Syria. So you can understand why I chose Egypt, thinking at the time it was a lot safer than Syria. It turned out to be, obviously things happened that I was not expecting. As you said, I arrived on the 10th of September. A day later, the world changed. So that's something which really I couldn't have predicted.
And then the 1st of April, as you say, you are taken from your home, and you don't at that stage know why.
No.
When you were arrested, what were the charges?
They didn't charge us when we were arrested. The charges came about 3 months later on. We were initially arbitrarily detained without charge and denied access to the consul. The consul has a duty to come and see us within 48 hours. They didn't come until 11 days later. And in between that stage, a lot of the torture happened, which I'm sure we'll go into. And then about 3 months later, we were taken off the system of arbitrary detention, which they reserve exclusively for Egyptians on a long-term basis. And they charged us with 3 charges. The first one was propagation by speech and writing, the ideas of a banned organisation which is called Hizb ut-Tahrir, or the Party of Liberation. The second charge was possessing literature of these said ideas. And the third charge was quite ridiculous, actually, possessing a printer.
Now, you are a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir.
Yes, I am.
And had you been propagating Hizb ut-Tahrir material in Egypt?
Well, I went as a student, and what I was doing was in the university campuses where naturally discussions take place amongst friends and students. People are talking about the problems in the developing world. So in this context, I would give my views and my opinions as to how a dictatorship is not the way forward for the Muslim world, how somebody who's been in power for 25 years tortures his population on a systematic basis is something which needs to change. And so that is the extent of my involvement. I was literally sharing my peaceful ideas with students on campus.
Peaceful ideas? Very
peaceful ideas, yes. Hizb ut-Tahrir since the 50s has been consistently saying that change does not come through violent means. It's a peaceful political party.
You're a member of a banned organisation, an organisation that you know is banned in Egypt because the Egyptian government says it wants to overthrow it. In fact, it's not just the Egyptian. Hizb ut-Tahrir would say it wants to overthrow the Egyptian government. And you are putting forward these views on a university campus.
I think anybody would want to remove a dictator who tortures his own population. I think, in fact...
Weren't you asking for trouble?
Well, this is the thing. If somebody goes out to propagate these ideas, then you're speaking to somebody who was sent as a student. I was sent by my university, and then in the context of students having discussions, sharing ideas, unless we're now actually saying that somebody should not actually have opinions. I mean, I think that when I say that the Muslim population as a whole believes in removing these dictators through peaceful means and replacing them with a caliphate system, which holds its ruler to account, and the rule of law and justice, which is what the caliphate means to us, everybody shares these ideas.
OK, well, let's come back to Hizb ut-Tahrir, but do you accept with hindsight that after September the 11th, to say these things in Egypt as a member of a group that was banned there, you were being naive?
I don't think that you could use the word naive, because unless, in principle, you believe that people should not really speak at all, unless you believe in self-censorship and not having the right to have an opinion, then you could blame somebody for this.
So you get taken, it's 3 months before you know what you're charged with, but presumably you had some suspicion.
Oh, yes, of course I had a suspicion. In fact, before I went, I spoke to my university and sought advice. And they assured me, they said, you're going as a student, there's nothing to worry about.
And did they know that you were a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir?
That's why I sought advice, because they did. I was in the university, I was a member already, yes.
And then what happened? Because you mentioned the first 11 days, which I think you would claim were the worst.
Yeah, we were taken to, upon being taken from my house, I was taken to the state security facility in Cairo, blindfolded, had my hands tied behind my back with rope, not even with handcuffs. And upon entering this building, we began to hear the screams of grown men begging for mercy. They were being tortured by electricity. We were denied sleep. We were given numbers to dehumanize us. I was given number 42. That was my number. I didn't have a name. I was number 42. They would come every hour and call the roll call. And if they'd find that you were asleep, you'd be beaten. So this is a form of sleep deprivation as well. And you have to stand up and answer your number. And at the same time, they're doing something which is they're going through these numbers from 1 to whatever, and they're asking you to go into the torture room. So you can imagine the feeling of somebody sitting there waiting for his turn to come, for his number to be called, and then he goes in to be tortured. And so they're going through the numbers one by one, and you're lying there, not allowed to sleep. You're hearing the screams, you're blindfolded, your hands are behind your back, tied with rope, waiting for your turn to be tortured.
And what happened in the torture room?
Well, I was beaten. I was threatened with sexual abuse. I had electricity brought to my face. I was threatened to be electrocuted. I had people tortured in front of me, before me, and I was told that if I did not cooperate, I would also be, when I say tortured, I mean electrocuted. I was also told that if I didn't cooperate, I would also be electrocuted. In fact, there were...
So did you actually see people being electrocuted?
That's right. In fact, there were 4 British citizens there at the time, which I discovered later on. But one of the British citizens was tortured in front of me with electricity. Specifically, I remember them torturing him because he was unable to respond in Arabic. And he was responding and trying to answer in English, and they were torturing him for that with electricity.
And how were they using electricity?
Because I'm blindfolded, I can't see, but he would say that they stripped him and then basically applied shocks to his legs on his right thigh whilst holding him down on the floor.
And what were you doing? What were you saying while this was going on?
They wanted me to listen to this, and then they came to interrogate me again after that. And so I said to them quite clearly, I said, you know, you're saying that I came here to do X, Y, and Z. I am a member of this party. Hizb ut-Tahrir calls for a peaceful change in Britain, not in Egypt. And I've come here as a student. And I tried to make that very clear to them. But they're quite conspiratorial, actually.
So, because one of the concerns that many people have is that they say these claims were made that you were tortured, but when you and the other 2 Britons who faced trial at the same time got to court, in court it was said that there was absolutely no evidence of any result of that torture on your bodies.
Well, the British consul at the time, whose name was Gordon Brown, personally witnessed, because he came to visit us on the 11th day, which is a whole 10 days too late, or 9 days too late. And despite the delay in coming to visit us, he witnessed bruises on the face of Reza Pankhurst, and wrote a letter to the judge saying, I have witnessed these bruises. Reza himself, when he signed, he was one of the British guys with us, when he signed his confession, forced confession, he signed the word lies inside his name. So instead of writing Reza Pankhurst, wrote Reza Pank lies, and on another occasion, Pankhurt instead of Hurst. And so really this should be enough, as well as the fact that Amnesty International has documented systematic use of torture in Egypt. It's well known that the Egyptian state security torture people with electricity and many, many other forms of torture. And so it's not surprising that the medical examiner who examined us in the Egyptian courts was working with the Egyptian authorities. And the form of examination was literally simply looking at us, giving us a brief look up and down, saying this guy is fine, and then wrote a report.
You see, what happened in the end was that you went through the court system, and you went to court 2 days. You've been in jail for 2 years before it got to trial, and before you were convicted. But you were convicted of something you admit to, whether your sort of confession was signed under duress. You were convicted of being a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir. You are a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir. Yeah, so let's look at this situation at who is the real criminal, somebody who tortures and convicts somebody to 5 years imprisonment for being a member of a peaceful political party. You know the law. It was banned in Egypt. I was a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir in Britain, not in Egypt. And what I did in Egypt was I went there as a student to complete a compulsory year abroad, and spoke to students about how dictatorship, how a dictator is not the way forward for the Muslim world. Indeed, but what seems extraordinary is even before you go, you realise that there might be a bit of an issue with it, which is why you check it out, as you say, before you go. Yeah. You go there, you're a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, you know it's banned there, you know why it's banned there, for the very reasons that you sit there in the university and put forward. And then you say it is completely unfair that I should have been taken in?
Well, yes, of course it is, because the trial itself was adopted as being unfair. The standards that the Foreign Office has for a fair trial were completely violated. And we have fair trials abroad, for example.
Do you accept that there's a problem with the principle, though, behind this?
I don't accept there's a problem with the principle for a reason. Unless we're saying that somebody should not think, that somebody should not have ideas, somebody should tactically accept torture and dictatorships, then really, I mean, I think the whole world at the moment, including the Western governments, are calling for change in the Muslim world due to the fact that the population, on whole, has been terrorised and victimised by these dictators.
But look at the long list. It's not just Egypt that's banned Hizb ut-Tahrir. This is an organisation that Tony Blair mentioned as wanting to ban. He hasn't got round to it yet, but may well yet do. It's banned in a very long list of countries. And even the British National Union of Students, which you would have thought would be all in favour of free speech, has banned the organisation from campuses because they don't like what the organisation is saying.
Right, if you look at the Muslim world, yes, I agree the party's banned in the Muslim world. But then again, everybody's banned in the Muslim world. I personally was in prison with the runner-up of the Egyptian general elections, Ayman Noor, who was, after losing the elections and getting second place, thrown into prison. And I spent time with him in my prison. So everybody is banned in the Muslim world. That's not the issue.
Hizb ut-Tahrir is so widely banned elsewhere. Yeah. It's banned in a number of countries in Europe. Right. And as I say,
Europe,
Britain is considering...
sorry, which countries is it banned
Germany.
in? It's not banned in Germany, I'm afraid. No, that's incorrect. The activities of the party, when they speak about Israel, for example, because it's a sensitive issue in Germany, that is banned. But it's not illegal to be a member.
But it's the same reasons that, the National Union of Students has banned it, because they say the organisation is bigoted because of its views on Jews.
If I could just complete what I was saying, that in Germany, it's not illegal to be a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir. It's not allowed to conduct activities
in Germany
as a party, but it's not illegal, and it's not illegal in any other European country. It's just Germany.
It was banned from operating in Germany after September the 11th.
That's right. That is it, banned from operating. The party has not been banned, and it's not banned in any other European country up until today. As for Tony Blair, then really, I mean, I think if his actions are becoming a criteria for fair standards nowadays, then it's a sad day. I mean, we know what he did when he invaded Iraq, and we know how he has a capacity to twist the truth. And I, for example, I'm not in favour of arbitrary detention, internment.
Okay. Well, let's get on to the truth of exactly what Hizb ut-Tahrir is about, because you said at the outset that its stated aims is to re-establish the Islamic Caliphate in the Islamic world. Now, what does that mean?
That means a system of ruling where the Muslims rule, yes, by the Sharia. What does that mean? It means to rule with accountability. The Caliph is elected. He does not have the power to rule without being held to account for his decisions. We are calling for the rule of law. We're calling for justice and equality before the law for all citizens, Muslims and non-Muslims. We're calling for forward thinking in terms of economic policy. We're calling for a union of all of the Muslim states under this caliph.
And what about women under Sharia law and their rights?
Women are allowed to have full access to their rights under the Sharia law.
But their rights are considerably curtailed.
Are you talking now about Islam or about the ideas of Hizb ut-Tahrir? Because you know, at the end of the day, I can here speak about the ideas of Hizb ut-Tahrir. As for Islam, this is something which has existed for 1400 years, and 1.5 billion Muslims hold on to the values of Islam. So we have to now draw a distinction. Are we here to discuss what Islam says is the relationship between men and women, or the interpretation of certain aspects of Islam?
It always comes down to the interpretation of a religion as to how it's operating.
Sure, so if you want to ask me specific questions about women, for example, I'll be happy to answer them.
Which is what I'm asking you.
Yeah.
And as far as Hizb ut-Tahrir is concerned, in a world which ended up in a situation that they were happy with, how would women be treated?
As I said, very fairly. If you want to ask specific...
Would they have the same rights as men?
In life, yes.
In access to jobs?
Yes, of course. My wife works. I'm a student. So I think really if you wanted, that's what I'm saying, if you ask specific issues, we've got no problem whatsoever with women working. We have no problem with, for example, with women driving. This is Saudi Arabia. We do not consider Saudi Arabia an Islamic state. We have no problem with many issues of women, for example, can stand for...
Even though Article 108 of the Constitution of Hizb ut-Tahrir declares that the primary role of a woman is that of a wife and a mother.
Right, if you're talking about primary role, then this is simply saying, as a guideline that Islam sets, not Hizb ut-Tahrir, that the primary role for a woman is to be a wife and a mother. However, if you ask the question, is a woman allowed to work, be educated? Yes, she is. In fact, it's a policy of the Islamic State to fully educate men and women.
Can she be a senior judge?
Now here, this comes down to interpreting Islamic law. There are a few issues within Islamic law where, for various reasons, that the Islamic scholars have put down. Now I myself am not an Islamic scholar. They have said, for example, that a woman cannot be of the highest judge only, simply the type of judge who is responsible for removing the caliph if he commits an action which violates his contract.
So she can't be that. Could she live with foreign men?
What do you mean by foreign men? That's quite a strange term, actually.
Well, men who are not... Well, could she live with a non-Muslim?
Could she live with a non-Muslim?
Yeah.
Do you mean her brother? Do you mean her father? Or do you mean a non-Muslim who's not related to her whatsoever?
As a husband?
Right. Of course, this is the thing, that Islam has set down certain laws. Now, any Muslim, not just a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, any Muslim would say that these laws, there's certain laws within Islam which are quite clear-cut. For example, one of the laws is this, that a woman is requested to marry a Muslim man. Now, as for the details of the policy of the Islamic State, and would they allow this, just to answer your question, would the Islamic State allow this? Then that comes down to simply the law that the Islamic State puts down. Is the woman granted equal access to justice to seek her rights in the context of that law?
Now, there will be many countries, many people listening to you who think, I agree with that. But where countries have problems with what Hizb ut-Tahrir is claiming is that you want this borderless state. You want one state. You want all the borders down between, and I presume it's just the Middle East.
The Muslim world.
Within the Muslim world, one state.
That's right, and this is how it was actually in the past.
And do you not see why certain governments would not be a little unnerved by that kind of talk?
Well, really, they'll be unnerved because it's against their interests. But if you're talking about in principle, what is wrong with Muslims wanting to unite under one government? Really, you have a situation where many forms of unions currently exist and are being formed in the world, including the European Union and what have you. What is wrong with the sincere wish that the majority of Muslims have of wanting to be united under one government and working towards that, which is called the Caliphate, working towards that in a peaceful way?
How do you get there in a peaceful way? Because that's where a lot of people have difficulties with Hizb ut-Tahrir. They say that you've got this a very radical idea, and how are you going to get there unless it is through the overthrow of governments and unless that overthrow comes about through some form of violence?
Well, you see, Hizb ut-Tahrir since the 50s has been working to change the dictatorships in the Muslim world through peaceful means. And it's been consistent since the 50s in this methodology, despite provocation of the most disgusting forms that you could think of. Men are being boiled alive in Uzbekistan by Islam Karimov, the president, who are members of Hizb ut-Tahrir. And despite the torture that myself, my colleagues and these men have gone through, we refuse to resort to violence. And it's the ideas of Hizb ut-Tahrir that prevented me, after going through what I went through and the anger that I feel towards both the British stance in our case and the Egyptians. And despite this anger, it's these ideas that have prevented me from resorting to or using this anger in a wrong way.
Does this caliphate extend to Britain?
No, of course not. This is a situation. We're working to establish the caliphate in the Muslim world. Once the state is established, this state will naturally conduct relationships with other countries. It will have peace, it will have war policy, it will have natural relationships in the context of the international world.
Hizb ut-Tahrir, they did a promotional video at a conference they had in Britain, and it carried the advice, I think Muslims in this country need to take a long, hard look at themselves and decide what is their identity. Are they British or are they Muslim? I am a Muslim, where I live is irrelevant. Is that your belief?
Well, you see, this is the thing. I would say that I have a British citizenship. I was born and raised here, and I'm a Muslim in Britain. I have no problem abiding by. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I have been all my life. I have a clean record, and I have no problem abiding by the laws of this land. However, when I'm talking about the Muslim world, not now what happens in Britain, and we have to make this very clear, we have a political agenda for the Muslim world. We are calling the Muslims to unite. We're calling for the peaceful change of these regimes in the Muslim world, and for them to unite under one state. And so really the focus of our call is not in Britain at all.
But you see, many people would say, look, here you are, and you've been very critical of the way the British government has dealt with your case.
Justly so, I think, yeah.
And they would say, if you believe that you're a Muslim first and foremost, why should the British government step in to help you out in a Muslim country? Well,
what it comes down to is, am I a human being? Now, if I've been tortured, if people have been tortured in front of me with electricity, if what happens in these prisons in Egypt is acceptable as a human, I mean, this is really what it comes down to. Tony Blair visited, for the 4 years I was in prison, he visited every year on an all-expenses-paid trip to Egypt. And on the one hand, we had the ambassador assuring us that they were doing everything they could to make representations for our case to the Egyptians. And on the other hand, we had Tony Blair visiting Egypt, sending
But they have a difficulty. They have a difficulty. You openly admit that you broke the law in that country. And that is why you were taken in. And you had to, and you acknowledge that, and you were convicted of that. And the Foreign Office is saying that ministers and officials have been actively involved since you were first detained. The degree of ministerial and senior official attention the case has received is considerable, and we've raised the case at every possible opportunity.
Well, of course they'd say that, but really if you look at the situation, we're meant to have been visited within 48 hours. We were visited after 11 days. We were tortured, and yet we had to serve 4 years in what was deemed by the British government as an unfair trial because there was no right of appeal. Amnesty International adopted us as prisoners of conscience. So if you wish to talk about law breaking, then
how do you not know that they were doing everything that they could and just Egypt wasn't responding?
Well, because Tony Blair visited every year for an all-expenses-paid holiday. Now, what message does that... I mean, if you think of how would anyone feel if they had been tortured in an Egyptian jail and the Prime Minister of their country visits that country every year, not even once?
But that's irrelevant, isn't it? I mean, he could be doing all he could be doing...
It's actually quite relevant because it sends the message that this is a safe place to visit. And that is the point, that I went there thinking it's a safe place to visit on the advice of my university. So that's actually very relevant because anyone who goes to visit this country could potentially be arrested and tortured for the ideas he holds. And breaking the law in that country means simply saying, I don't agree with a dictator. So if that's what it means to break the law, then I'm proud to say, yes, I don't agree with a dictator.
But there are so many Britons who go not only for holiday, who go there because they have family there. What are you saying, that none of them should go because it endorses the regime?
No, I'm saying that when the Prime Minister goes, it sends a signal. When average Joe Bloggs goes, it doesn't send that signal. And so it's very important on a political level not to send mixed signals. In fact, I think that the Western governments are propping up these regimes in the Muslim world for their own interests. And Egypt is the second largest recipient of foreign aid after Israel.
British Foreign Office deny it, but there have been claims that your release was part of a deal struck between Egypt and Britain, where Britain would agree to extradite certain terrorists that Egypt want in return for your early release.
I would hope not, but if that was the case, then really it's a sad thing. I in prison, witnessed the ineffectiveness of these memorandums of understanding. There were people that were rendered from Sweden to Egypt under such agreements that they wouldn't be tortured and under such assurances. And despite that, they were in my prison with me. They were tortured. And not only were they tortured, when they complained to the Swedes that they were tortured, they were taken to be tortured again for complaining.
So the signing of there's talks going on to sign these memoranda of understanding. There's no guarantee Egypt could give.
I'm a personal witness, there's no guarantee. I saw people that were tortured after such understandings. They are not legally binding in Egypt. Egypt does not respect its own domestic law, let alone international law. It doesn't respect any law.
So what happens, having gone through all this, you're now released. How has it affected your politics and your beliefs?
I'd like to say that what I went through, all it served to do is convince me even more that there's a need for a peaceful political change to work in the Muslim world, to convince the Muslim population that there's a need to establish this caliphate as soon as possible and to hold our rulers to account. And I'm more convinced that this will come through peaceful means. In fact, in prison I was trying to convince former violent prisoners that this can only come through peaceful means.
Maajid Nawaz, thank you for coming on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much. Thanks.